All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Miami-Dade City Attorney Candidate Forum, co-hosted by The Appeal and Now This. I am Jerry Iannelli. I'm a staff reporter with The Appeal, formerly with Miami New Times, and today we are talking about the Miami-Dade County State Attorney race. So I'm excited to welcome our guests to this forum. There are two candidates running for Florida State Attorney for Miami-Dade County. Both were invited, but only one was able to join us today, Melba Pearson, who is joining us today, previously served in the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office for 16 years and was the Deputy Director of the ACLU of Florida. Her opponent is Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, who has been the Miami-Dade State Attorney for 27 years. Ms. Fernandez-Rundle was unable to make today's forum, but has committed to participate in a part 2 with us on August 14th at 3 p.m. So we will have the opportunity to discuss these very same issues with her. I want to make clear again that both candidates were invited to participate, and our decision to host this forum with only one candidate present indicates neither support nor opposition to either candidate or their respective positions. And thank you for joining us today. In terms of our rules, Melba, thank you for joining us. Before we proceed, there are a few ground rules for the forum. We will begin with an opening statement from you, and then we will move on to the question and answer portion of the forum, and then end with closing remarks from you. Melba, you will have 2 minutes for your opening statement. I will then ask questions. You will then have 2 minutes to respond. There will only be a follow-up if I, the moderator, elect to ask a follow-up question. And finally, you will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. With a population of 716,940, Miami-Dade County is the most populous county in Florida and the 7th most populous county in the United States. The state attorney makes decisions that impact the lives of these country's residents and has the power to shape and change criminal legal system policy. Several crises in America are colliding right now. The killings of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and Breonna Taylor, among tragically many others, the violent police responses to peaceful protests, and the grave threat posed by COVID-19, particularly to vulnerable communities and people of color. These intertwined crises are exposing profound inadequacies of the legal system. So I will then open this up to you, to Melba, and if you would like to make your opening statement, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Jerry. Hello, everyone. And thank you to the Justice Collaborative, The Appeal, and Now This for hosting this forum and for inviting me to participate. So my name is Melba Pearson, and I'm running to be the next state attorney of Miami-Dade County, Florida. Little bit about me. I'm originally from New York. I've lived here in Miami for close to 23 years or so. Actually, Election Day on August 18th will make my actual anniversary. So that's kind of awesome. Great way, I think, to come full circle. I am the daughter of Caribbean immigrants. My father is from Jamaica and my mother was from Trinidad. And I came down here to pursue a new path and to change the world, right? And what ended up happening is that I worked at the state attorney's office for close to 16 years. I handled everything from misdemeanors to double homicides and everything in between. I am a past president of the National Black Prosecutors Association, and I also served as the president of the Black Women Lawyers Association here in South Florida. I left being a prosecutor back in 2017 to become the deputy director of the ACLU of Florida, where I was honored to work on voting rights issues, including our historic Amendment 4, which returned voting rights to people with criminal convictions, as well as criminal justice reform. I'm running because it's time for a change. It's time for real accountability. It's time for bad law enforcement officers to be held accountable. It's time to crack down on public corruption, and it's time to address the racial inequalities that have been very much laid bare over the last few years here in Miami-Dade County. It's time for bold new leadership, and that person is me. So thank you.
I think I was muted there. COVID-19 interview, what are you gonna do? To start with our questions then, the protests we're seeing across the country are coming at a unique moment as cities and states are slashing budgets for services across the board, waste collection, housing, education, healthcare services during the middle of a historically devastating pandemic. Yet many police budgets remain essentially untouched, or in some cities are actually growing. And as this conversation about defunding the police takes place in different cities across the country, what is your position on realigning public safety budgets by shifting resources away from and investing in alternative public safety programs? Oh, Melba, I think you're muted now.
Yeah, that mute button is everywhere. So my position when it comes to defunding the police is as follows. First off, I think that we need to be very clear on the definition, because I think when many stakeholders hear defund, they hear abolish, right? And there is a discussion to be had around that, but I don't think we're there at this point in time. We really need to look at why is it we as a country are choosing over and over again not to invest in social services and education, right? I think it was possibly Joe Biden, when he was senator, said at one point, show me your budget and I'll tell you what your priorities are. And if we continue to prioritize the back end of things, which is once someone is already in the system, rather than prioritizing prevention, we're going to keep seeing these problems over and over again. And I've seen this firsthand as a prosecutor. There will be programs that provide social services and that are extremely effective, yet every time the legislature is looking for ways to shave the budget, they always end up cutting the services that are doing well in our communities. And so we really have to look at what we're doing as a community. We need to hold our legislators, our mayors, our governors accountable for failing to prioritize social services and education, knowing that those are the two top prevention tools for criminal justice.
And just as a follow-up question, I know the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, on that note, is typically a loud voice at the state level for change and reform in terms of lobbying and in terms of sort of directing funding and changing programs. I guess, what is your position on sort of using that position as a bully pulpit of sorts at the state level?
So the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office is the largest prosecutor's office in the state of Florida and the fourth largest in the country. So that is a position that has tremendous weight and does have a very loud voice when it comes to these types of issues, which is why I think it's really critical to have a progressive at the helm, a true progressive at the helm of that office. When elected, I will be very sure to constantly be going up to Tallahassee, our capital, as well as going to Washington, D.C. to continue to lobby for the importance and the proper funding for social services as well as education, and making sure that we are prioritizing prevention rather than heavy-handedness on the back end.
So to get to, oh, I think my mic might be a little bit low here. I'm gonna lean in a little bit. So to get into our next question here, and it's sort of related, police unions are frequently prevent officer accountability and foster secrecy around policing. The common understanding seems to be that it's the prosecutorial reliance upon police officers as well as police unions that deter prosecutors from challenging the culture of these departments. There have been calls across the country to disentangle this close relationship, as well as calls for elected prosecutors to reject financial contributions from police unions or donate existing contributions to community-based nonprofits. What is your position on police union campaign contributions and any contributions you have received to date?
So I have received no contributions from any police union. I've not received any endorsement from any police union. I am a grassroots campaign that is strictly beholden to the people. So I can literally count the number of individual donors, and we're well over 1,000 at this point, who have contributed to the campaign. And that's the way I think it should be. We need to be beholden to the voters, to the electorate, to the people that put us in office, rather than to special interests. interest. Additionally, part of my platform involves making sure that, number one, I have a dedicated civil rights unit that will work on and have dedicated prosecutors in that unit who only work on police misconduct and police shooting cases, so that those cases can be handled in an expedited manner, as opposed to what's happening now, which is these cases will linger for literally 5 and 6 years, completely unacceptable, with no closure for anyone. And then the last aspect of that, I have been in discussions with the candidates that are running on a progressive platform in the county north of me, and assuming we both win, or both sides have progressive folks at the helm, we have discussed exchanging each other's police shootings, so that there's another layer, there's another level of distance between the department and this prosecutor's office, to really address that concern that comes from the community that, listen, you guys are looking out for each other, or just on a basic survival level, you need the police officers to be able to prosecute cases the following week, the following month, etc.
I'm muting myself here. Thank you. And I guess I know this is something you've repeatedly addressed already, but from 2009 to 2014, there were 75 police shooting cases reported in Miami-Dade County. Of the 73 cases reviewed by the state attorney's office, no officers have ever been charged with murder in connection to an on-duty shooting. In this time of reckoning over police violence, if elected, how would you ensure that police officers are held accountable for misconduct? Oh, you're muted.
Yep. It goes a little bit further than that, Jerry. In the 27 years that my opponent has been in office, she has never, ever, ever filed charges against a police officer for an on-duty killing. Not once. And there's a number of cases and opportunities that were very appropriate for charges being filed and could have been successful in front of a jury, yet she chose not to do it. So my approach is going to be, like I touched on briefly before, the civil rights unit that's going to have dedicated prosecutors who work on this issue. Because the way it's handled right now, you as a prosecutor have your normal caseload, whatever it is you work on, and then on top of that, you're taking on police shooting cases. So I want to have a situation where my prosecutors are subject matter experts in all things use of force, and that they are able to be creative and to think outside of the box, because maybe there's not enough evidence to sustain a murder charge, right, in a fatal shooting, but maybe there's a perjury charge because the officer involved lied on official reports. Maybe there's a culpable negligence charge because something happened to a person while they were in the custody of a police officer, right? So it's all about looking at the evidence and doing your best to bring cases that are solid, that are evidence-based, right? But also you're being clear to hold bad actors accountable, to send a message to the community that we take these cases seriously, and that, certain lives aren't going to be treated and valued more than others. And it sends a message to bad law enforcement that this behavior is not okay, and there is a reckoning when it comes to harming and disrespecting communities that you're sworn to serve and protect.
And so in the middle of the night on March 13th, Louisville, Kentucky police executed a no-knock warrant and entered 26-year-old Breonna Taylor's apartment. They fired shots and hit Breonna at least 8 times, killing her. Police found nothing illegal in her home, and in fact, the person they were searching for was already in custody. Police departments all over the country use these same tactics with disastrous results. What is your position on creating a policy prohibiting prosecutors from supporting law enforcement requests for no-knock warrants and publicly supporting a ban on no-knock warrants?
So, and to make matters worse with regards to the Breonna Taylor case, I believe that the officers not only had the wrong house, but had the wrong neighborhood. They were 10 miles off. So there was sloppy police work on every single aspect of that case. So I am vehemently opposed to no-knock warrants because of this type of issue. And number two, again, it's just, there's so many collateral consequences that come from getting it wrong. And And Brianna suffered the ultimate collateral consequence. She was murdered in her bed, and her boyfriend was arrested for protecting his home. That right of stand your ground didn't apply to him in the initial phases until later on there was a review and the case was dropped. So I will be very honored and happy to raise my voice in collaboration with others to end the practice of no knock warrants, and make sure that our communities are protected, and that officers have solid evidence that they've checked everything, that they have it right, and that people don't lose their lives in this horrible manner. However, I don't believe we utilize no knock warrants in Miami-Dade County. That's not something that's ever come to my attention. Every warrant I've reviewed was a traditional warrant. So, but if that is happening here, I have no problem getting with the mayor, the county commissioners, as well as the police chiefs to work on ending that practice.
So this is something that I know has come up in sort of Miami-Dade criminal justice circles and discussions, but I want to turn to the issue of what are known as Brady or no-call lists, which is when prosecutors identify law enforcement officers who have credibility or misconduct issues. Advocates around the country have demanded that prosecutor offices implement do-not-call lists for, quote, officers who have committed perjury and other acts of grave misconduct, and other prosecutors in Florida have adopted such lists. What is your position on this? And if elected, would you implement a no-call policy? And I will have a few follow-up questions after that.
So absolutely, I will be creating an officer no-call policy and list that's going to be publicly available, because at the end of the day, we need to be very transparent around how we conduct justice in the criminal justice system in the counties that we serve, and the public has a right to know, right? And also, I think as a general premise, it's a good practice because, again, it's not a situation where the knowledge resides with one particular group of people in the office. Oh yeah, that officer has problems with the truth, but then a newer prosecutor who might be coming in might not be privy to that information and will rely on that officer's testimony, not knowing there's a greater problem. So I think it is something that will go a long way to making sure justice is real for everyone. And again, you serve as a deterrent for officers to, lie on their reports and those types of unseemly behavior.
Apologies there. I thought I got both my cats out of my office, but one has been hiding. And so I kind of wanted to ask a few things here. First and foremost, I guess, what mechanism would you use to keep the list public? Would that be something either publicly kept on a website, or would that be just something you would promise to release as a records request to anyone who would ask? I guess, sort of how would you sort of commit to keeping that publicly accountable and available?
That would be something I'd keep on the website. I want to make sure that the Miami-Dade State Attorney's website is not just about like information and what's going on cases and things like that, but it's truly a resource to the community. So if people want to know, first of all, I intend to release a report around racial inequalities in Miami-Dade County, much like the ACLU did with the unequal treatment report that came out in 2017. I'm going to be commissioning a similar study with more updated data, and I'm going to release that to the public. But that's something that's going to be on the website, right? So there'll be that. There'll be the ability for people to give information with regards to past cases, and if there's a conviction integrity problem. In other words, you've got information about a case that's been closed and somebody's serving a prison sentence and they're not the person who did it. There's going to be that ability to reach out to us through our website. And the officer no call list will be on our website, as well as surrounding police policy, because again, the public has a right to know. And my goal in becoming state attorney, one of my goals, is to make sure that I center the concept of radical transparency and then create a culture that is going to have the voters who are now more educated about what's going on in the system not only hold me accountable, but hold other stakeholders and other elected officials accountable, and being like, why can't can't you release information the same way the state attorney does, right? Because at the end of the day, when voters are fully educated and they know everything that's going on, they can make better decisions with regards to who aligns with their values and who they want representing them. It only makes our democracy stronger.
And I also wanted to ask as well, and we've seen in some other cities that do have such lists, Baltimore, for example, where these officers have wound up on lists, but still been called to either testify in court or prosecutors are relying on their arrest reports or official documentation despite them sitting on these lists. And I guess if you could maybe speak to how you would hold your own prosecutors and employees accountable to using the list once it actually exists.
Yeah, I think number one, that's a matter of training, right? Because again, if it's a situation where I put up this lovely list and it's all great format and easy and accessible, but my prosecutors don't know that it exists and how to use it, then that's a failure of leadership on my part. So I'm going to educate my prosecutors on how to use that list. And whether it's we're creating literal checklists with paper or, I would prefer something that's in a, collaborative type system, but as a checklist, when you're going through filing your cases and working on your cases, there always has to be a reminder, did you look at the officer no call list? Did you check your case's witness list against the officer no call list, right? Because if they're not doing that, you're right, Jerry, it defeats the entire purpose. So it's about training and information. And then if it comes to light that someone still called an officer that has a problem with the truth, then number one, it's a matter of talking to them and finding out, did you just not know? Did you forget? Were you in a rush? Or is it that you don't value this? And that requires two separate courses of action. So, the response to me is not, oh, you didn't use the no call list, you're now fired, right? Because that also doesn't make sense and can cause additional problems. But it's all about holding them accountable, teaching them. And then if there's a blatant refusal, then that has to be handled in a different way.
And so to move on a little bit, so prosecutorial misconduct is also a denial of justice. As a state attorney, what will you do to hold yourself and every other prosecuting attorney accountable and adhere to strict ethical guidelines? And how will you respond to instances of prosecutorial misconduct? We sort of addressed this in my follow-up question there, but if you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, agreed. So first of all, I think a lot of prosecutorial misconduct comes from a lack of training, right? Because sometimes as a prosecutor, and a young prosecutor especially, you get dropped in with not a ton of training, you have a huge caseload, so you don't often know, okay, is this something I should be sending out to opposing counsel? There's not folks that are there really mentoring you and shepherding you through the process so you know what you should and shouldn't be doing. And sometimes you pick up bad habits. I mean, that's just, that's unfortunately, that's reality. So it's about really centering training, making sure that the supervisors know what the requirements are. So make sure that they have the right standards that we are going to be working from. They're educated on the policy. So that way the supervisors can reinforce that in the prosecutors on a day-to-day basis and then correct any issues that arise. Now, when we're looking at more senior prosecutors who are committing misconduct, that is more in the realm of inexcusable from the standpoint of you should know better, right? Like you've been doing this long enough, you should know better. So that will be dealt with in a harsher manner. But at the end of the day, like I will not tolerate prosecutorial misconduct. Again, I want to make sure that my prosecutors are trained properly so that you won't have misconduct. And if it does occur, then I will deal with it aggressively. But also I do want to lift up what the Brooklyn District Attorney, I believe it was last week, I guess all the days are running together because of Rona, but I think it was last week, it was revealed that he did a study and it showed that 65%, I believe, of the exonerations that happened in his jurisdiction were as a result of prosecutorial misconduct. So I would want to do a similar study to see, what the rates are, and also use that as part of the training strategy to avoid, prosecutorial misconduct, because then people are really like, wow, I mean, these are people's lives that have gotten destroyed. destroyed by actions, right? So I think that's another way to, number one, be more transparent, but number two, to make sure that people are very clear on the consequences of what happens when you do not act in an ethical manner.
We are having some technical difficulties, but we're waiting for his video to come back on.
No worries.
Oh, and we're back. Sorry, I believe I got a Zoom crash there.
Brave new world.
Yes. So yeah, let's pull this back up here. Apologies about that. And so I guess if we can just move on then to the pandemic and how it's impacting the criminal legal system and various other aspects of social services around Miami-Dade County. Across the country, COVID-19 has highlighted policy failings within local and federal approaches to criminal justice. What specific criminal justice policy failings has COVID-19 exposed in Miami-Dade County? And what will you do to change those policies and practices within the prosecutor's office?
So the biggest failing that was revealed was around the bail system. In Florida, we have a cash bail system. As soon as this crisis broke, I went on record, hosted a press conference, calling for some very concrete changes in light of what was happening as a result of the virus, which included a moratorium on arresting people, except when it comes to people who pose a risk to the community. So opting for arrest warrants or civil citations rather than arresting people and booking them in the jail. Because of the close quarters, there's no way to social distance, and that exacerbated the spread. So I was calling for a moratorium on arrest. I was calling for the release of all nonviolent offenders and people who do not pose a risk to the community, so that those who end up staying in custody are better able to social distance and to clean their areas. And lastly, calling for a pausing of fines, fees, and restitution payments, because you think about the people who are, they are laid off, or they're not essential workers, so they're not able to, basically pay their bills. So now to be able to pay court obligations is completely tough for them. So I wanted to make sure that we were being really proactive on that. As a result of my advocacy, believe it or not, my opponent actually started, speaking on these issues as well. And as a result, a few people were able to be released, but still not in a manner that was, I think, rapid enough. So moving forward, number one, I would be fighting to end the use of cash bail for non-violent offenses. So that way people are not coming into the system at all from that perspective. And they're able to work on the issues that got them into the system while still being able to be out in the community working and taking care of their families, right? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is giving a lot more grace periods with regards to people having to pay fines, fees, and restitutions, and waiving it if at all possible, because again of the financial burden that it is putting on. But then lastly, I think the biggest thing, which is not even a failing, I think it's more of an opportunity, is that we all discovered this thing called Zoom. Right? So now we can use that technology as a way of communicating with victims, survivors, witnesses, anybody anybody who is having to offer testimony or evidence in a case. So that way they don't have to drive, for instance, the south end of the county is an hour away from the main state attorney's office. So that makes it, inaccessible for a lot of people, especially when we eventually go back to work and all of that. Well, now you have a situation situation. You've got to take off work in the middle of the day. You've got to drive or find transportation to the state attorney's office. You give your testimony, and then it's, you're looking at a 3-4 hour gap in the middle of the day. And if you're not a white collar worker, that's not even an option, right? So using technology to make the system more accessible to more people. I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we've gained from this crisis.
So on that note, some jurisdictions have also adjusted their calculations around public safety in terms of maybe reducing the number of people detained pre-trial, detained on technical violations, releasing elderly individuals serving long sentences in response to the unique threat of an outbreak. Has the pandemic changed how you assess public safety sort of in general and what you consider public safety? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that my viewpoint on public safety has really changed. I was always in favor of bail reform. So, nothing changed for me there. And I always saw and wondered why we didn't utilize technology on a broader level. Again, as I think of, the person that works at a big box store and lives an hour away from the main office and has no car, no real transportation, because Miami is not a public transportation city. It's just not. So if you don't have a car, you're really going to struggle here, right? And a Lyft or an Uber can be very expensive depending on where you're trying to go. So I don't really I don't feel like that I had any changes when it came to public safety. I think this pandemic really bolstered some of the best practices that folks have been advocating for in the criminal justice reform space for many years. And now it's like, oh, wait, this is actually more viable, right? And it's not because we didn't know that all along. It's just that everybody else is catching up. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
So on that note, some of the most vulnerable people in this pandemic are the unhoused or those struggling with mental illness. In 2019, 3,628 people were unhoused in Miami-Dade County, with an increase of 23% specifically in the city of Miami Beach. Many within these populations tend to be overrepresented in the criminal legal system because counties lack the resources to appropriately address their needs, and the pandemic has only exacerbated these challenges. The state attorney's office plays a substantial role in determining to what degree, if at all, the Miami-Dade County unhoused population will continue to experience criminalization. So what specific steps will you take to ensure that a person's lack of stable housing or their poverty does not affect their interaction with the criminal legal system? And what specific steps did you take to ensure that a person's mental illness is sufficiently addressed and does not end up putting them in a worse position within the criminal legal system?
Yeah, so that's an issue that I've been looking at a lot lately. I've been in contact and working with an advocate locally by the name of Dr. Armin Henderson. Some folks may know him from a very unpleasant interaction he had with City of Miami law enforcement recently. He has been on the front lines of working with the unhoused population and making sure that they have access. He's testing them for COVID-19. He's, helping install hand washing stations and, other ways for folks to be able to protect themselves in the course of this pandemic. So I'd be looking to people like him and real leaders in the community that is advocating for the unhoused to find best practices in being able to make sure that people experiencing homelessness are not victimized by the system. One of the things off the top of my head that I've been exploring and looking at a lot of models around is having an unhoused court. I know that some cities have been really effective with it. Again, I just want to make sure that we're not doing anything that exacerbates problems rather than, really just connecting people with services and getting them to where they need to be. But I also think a greater discussion, which would be about using my platform, needs to be had about where is the budget? Where is the money going? Because there's all this money that's supposedly out there to help people who are experiencing homelessness, yet our unhoused population hasn't really diminished in recent years. So, that tells me something's rotten in Denmark, right? Something is just not right. So it's about really, raising awareness around, hey, look, these are the organizations that are supposed to be helping, and where's that money going? Who is in charge of oversight and putting that public pressure to make sure that more people are being helped? And again, also putting pressure on our legislature to make sure that when they do budget appropriations, they are funding organizations that really do effective work with the unhoused population, because again, it's all about the prevention, right? When you get to the point of you're already on the street and now law enforcement is dealing with you, now things get very, very dicey. And then the last aspect, again, is about that funding of social services, because again, we know that police officers are not, they're not adept necessarily at working with somebody who's experiencing a mental health crisis. That's not their area of expertise. Like literally people go to college, they go get a master's degree in social work, or they go to medical school and learn psychiatry, psychology. I mean, these are advanced degrees, and our police officers, they go to academy for 6 months. So they may get an hour or two course on a little bit about mental health, but they're not experts. So it's really making sure that social service folks are the ones who are responding and working with the unhoused population, not law enforcement. And while, again, that's not directly within my purview, I'd be using my platform in my office to keep loudly advocating for that to happen.
I do have a follow-up question on that note in terms of a specific Miami-Dade County issue that has come up in recent years that would be within your office's purview, I should say, is that there have been the most notable one being in Miami Beach, these sort of civil citation sort of courts that have been set up. There's essentially municipal courts that are basically run with the approval of the state attorney's office to sort of crack down on what essentially have been mostly crimes allegedly committed by the homeless. And I guess I am curious sort of if you are familiar with the way these sort of municipal courts have been operating, what your thoughts are on them, and if there's something you would sort of sign off on as if elected state attorney.
I would have to take a deeper look into that, because I did read 1 or 2 stories about the existence of this court, but there's not a lot of other information that's widely available. So that, to me, is all about transparency. So I want to know what the outcomes are. Are they actually connecting people with services, or are they just, punishing them knowing that they have no income? So if you give them a $500 citation and they don't pay it, you already know they're going to be in violation down the line, right? So I want to make sure that what's happening makes sense. And I don't know that I'm necessarily okay with just a municipal court. I would be looking more along the lines, like I touched on earlier, about the unhoused court that I've seen the models of in several other states, especially out west. Again, just to make sure that people are getting the help that they need, and it's not like, oh, great, we're punishing these people, because at the end of the day, you're never going to incarcerate your way out of any problem, and you're certainly not going to incarcerate your way out of homelessness, the concept of homelessness. Like that's just not going to happen. We have to address it head on, and we have to be assertive about it. We have to make sure that we're budgeting enough money to make sure that there's transitional housing for people, that the transitional housing is safe, that we're connecting people with medical care, especially if they're struggling with mental health or addiction issues, and that we are sending folks who need it and who meet the criteria to diversionary courts, to problem-solving courts, again, with the purpose of rehabilitation, not just, oh my gosh, let's punish them and that's somehow going to fix things. Because again, we've got decades of research to show that that approach does not work.
We are having a few more technical difficulties. Give us one moment. I apologize.
Sorry about that. This app is just not cooperating today. So yeah, I'm not sure if did we pause in the middle of that?
Yeah, I gave a pretty long answer.
Okay, got it. So then we will move on. Thank you.
Back. I was just like, we're talking.
Yeah, my app just keeps crashing. I apologize. And so I wanted to move on to substance abuse and pretrial diversion programs briefly, and then move into asking for your closing statement. So what, if any, changes would your office make to divert people away from the criminal legal system for substance abuse-related offenses? Sort of a broad question.
Yeah, there's already an existent drug court as well as a mental health court. What I'd be looking to do is expand the criteria so that more people can have access and that more people can get the help that they need. I also will be looking at, as part of my plan to end the use of cash bail for nonviolent offenses, I would be looking at other community-based programs that I could be referring people to, that my office could be referring people to during the time that they're out of custody waiting for their case to be resolved, right? Whether it's going to be they're going to take a plea or they're going to go to trial, during that time, which unfortunately in Miami could be 2 to 3 years. That's just our reality. So during that time, making sure that there's sort of like either outpatient or other programs that they can attend to be able to address those issues during the time that they're waiting. I firmly believe in the power of diversion courts. I firmly believe that people who are ill, because addiction is an illness, mental illness is an illness, you need to treat the illness and not punish the person. I know sometimes it's tough. I think there's been some discussion of that around Kanye West and, Kim coming out with a statement saying like, give him grace, give him, space because he's struggling with mental illness. And then you're trying to balance that with some of the things that are said or some of the actions taken. So I think as a country, we're getting better when it comes to mental illness and addiction and understanding that it's a sickness, but then we still, I think, harbor some judgment with regards to, well, but they did this. I know they're sick, but they did this. And we start to be judgmental and not want to be supportive. So I definitely want to center rehabilitation and help as part of my program, because at the end of the day, that's what makes our community safer. When you have people that are able to have access to the services they need, they can then lead productive lives, and then they're not going to commit new crime. But if you keep criminalizing people, not giving them the opportunity to get better and not connecting them with the help they need, we're literally doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And that is the definition, as they say, of insanity, right? You're just thinking that the outcome is going to be different. We know it doesn't work. So let's do what we know works.
So on that note, I know you've spoken in the past about wanting to, I guess, sort of essentially end all, if I'm correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially end all prosecutions for low-level marijuana possession, and also sort of look at the way a lot of sort of possession with the intent to sell cases are handled and are sort of packaged and then looked at. But if you could sort of speak to, I guess, how your office would handle sort of either other types of drug possession cases, whether it's cocaine, heroin, any of that, especially during the ongoing opiate crisis that still is happening amid everything else that's going on right now, and sort of how your office would address those other cases as well to either potentially divert them from the criminal legal system or handle them in some way.
Yeah. So again, I'm always going to center rehabilitation because too often we focus on punishment or retribution and not think about rehabilitation as the tool to keeping community safe. So for me, it's about connecting people and expanding that criteria to be able to be part of drug court and other diversionary programs. I will not be prosecuting possession of marijuana. I will not be prosecuting possession of marijuana with the intent to sell, because of the fact that so many times people who are charged with possession with intent to sell, it's really personal use. The way I like to explain it is like, some people, when the weekend comes, they have one beer. Other people have a 6-pack, right? Like it's just different tolerance. So for some people, it might be one bag. For other people, it might be a few bags, right? And that's their weekend. It is what it is. It's not my place to judge that, right? And then when I look at that in the context of the national scene, where we have a solid third, if not more, of states that have legalized marijuana either for recreational, medical, or both, I want to make sure that what I'm doing here is equitable to other parts of the country. Because to me, it is not justice when the same plant causes one person to go to prison and another person to make $1 million. That's not okay with me. That's not justice. So I want to make sure that what I'm doing is equitable. Looking at possession of other drugs, again, it's all about connecting people to help and to treatment. I know not everybody's ready for treatment right out the gate, but we're going to have to be creative and find ways to make sure that we're not punishing people for being ill, for having an illness, which is addiction.
There's one other specific type of charge I've seen used in terms of drug cases in Miami-Dade County and across Florida that I think anyone following this is seeing sort of escalate during the opiate crisis, which is sort of these charges where someone is charged with murder. I guess drug dealers are charged with murder for essentially selling drugs that someone then took an overdose and died. And a lot of these cases often wind up being, someone potentially was a friend of someone who gave someone drugs, that person overdosed. And these cases have sort of escalated throughout Florida, especially during, I know the statute itself has existed for quite a long time, but seems to have been sort of revamped during the opiate crisis. And I'm curious if that's something you've been paying attention to, what your thoughts are on those types of charges, and sort of, I guess, even generally the over-policing of the opiate crisis.
Yeah, I've seen a few cases, not a lot, like a handful of cases around this issue. I'm not a fan. It doesn't sit right with me. Because at the end of the day, the person made a choice, right? Like they're still ill. Don't get me wrong. You have the illness of addiction, and the addiction tells you, oh, you can use a little bit more than you think you can, right? And that's what leads to the overdose. But I don't know that it's the drug dealer's fault that you took too many drugs, right? Because if it wasn't that drug dealer, it's going to be a different drug dealer. So, it's one thing if you want to focus on the sale, right? But to charge them with murder, I think is a bridge too far. And I don't know if juries really are buying that argument, right? Which might be the reason why a lot of prosecutors aren't charging that offense. It just, it doesn't sit right with me.
I'm gonna unmute myself here. Thank you. And so to move on, I guess I know a lot of A, around the country, and B, in Miami-Dade County, a lot of changes have during the COVID-19 pandemic have been labeled as sort of temporary. But do you plan to enact any additional pretrial detention policy reforms to ensure that the reductions in the jail population seen during the pandemic continue into the future? I know you've already spoken about the abolition of cash bail, so no need to repeat that, but if there's anything else that comes to mind.
The only other thing is to make sure we're doing expedited dockets around the people who are in the higher risk category, because just because of the fact that you're charged with a more serious crime doesn't mean that you shouldn't at least have a hearing as to whether or not you should be released. So if you're immunocompromised, if you're ill for some other reason, if you are elderly, whatever the case may be, there may be other aspects that need to be explored. And you may in fact not pose a risk, even though the allegations on his face may be more serious. So for me, it's about having expedited hearings in the court system to make sure that people aren't languishing in jail who do not need to be. But I think, again, my bail reform policy will address a lot of these things in the long run.
Likewise, one of the most vulnerable populations during the pandemic is the immigrant community. More than 1 to 5 people in Florida are immigrants. In addition to enhanced pandemic vulnerabilities, the criminal legal system profoundly impacts how immigrant communities interact with federal agencies and the Trump administration. Should prosecutors consider collateral immigration consequences in charging decisions, plea offers, and sentencing recommendations? And what effect should those considerations have?
Yeah, so first off, under my administration, we're going to be working more proactively with the undocumented community because many times the undocumented community are the victims slash survivors of crimes because people prey on them knowing that they're not going to report because they're afraid of law enforcement and because they're worried about being deported or that someone in their family has undocumented status. So I want to make sure they know that I don't care about your status. I only care if you've been harmed in some way, and I just want to make sure that you're able to live your life peacefully in this county without being harmed. So that's just one aspect that I wanted to bring up. But with regards to the immigration status, I think that my prosecutors should and will take into consideration immigration status from the perspective of if the person doesn't pose a risk and if it's an offense that is deportable, I'm willing to be flexible on the level of charge so that the person doesn't get deported, or, work out a different plea if we think that that's going to be able to balance both holding them accountable for whatever it is they did, but also keep them in the country, again, if it's something that does not pose a risk to the community. I'll also be bringing on an immigration attorney on staff because I know a lot of people may think, oh, lawyers know everything about every type of law. No, we don't. We have areas of specialty, stuff that we're really good at, right? I am awesome at criminal justice policy. I know a little bit about immigration, but don't give me your case to handle, right? Like I would botch it completely. So that's why, a lot of prosecutors don't know about immigration consequences because it's not something you learn in law school. It's a very specific niche part of the law. So I would be bringing on an immigration attorney onto staff to be able to advise us, number one, in creating policy, number two, consulting with the prosecutors to kind of guide them through individual fact-specific situations, but also number three, going back and looking at old cases. And if someone is like, listen, I'm applying to get citizenship right now, but I have this case from 10 years ago, I've done everything, I haven't reoffended, whatever the case may be, I would be willing to go back and, dismiss that case retroactively so that the person is able to get their citizenship. That's not going to be a blanket thing for everybody, but, anybody is willing to put in for that. It's just a matter of looking at the cases and making sure, again, that the victim or survivor is okay with that outcome. All of the conditions have been met, and that there's no other problems that we should be aware of.
So with that, I just would welcome you to give your closing statement and see if there's anything else you'd like to add and kind of move from there.
Great. So thank you again, Jerry, the Justice Collaborative, Now This, the Appeal, for hosting this. I love the discussion. I really enjoy talking about criminal justice and the way that we can make things better. My election is on August 18th. I am the only true progressive in the race. I definitely encourage everyone to learn more about me. My website is www.melbaformiami.com, Melba, F-O-R, Miami.com. You can find me on all socials at @melbaformiami, and I'm super excited to get to victory on August 18th and really roll up my sleeves and get to the hard work of making justice real and equitable for everyone in this county, to include our kids, making sure they're treated like kids, to end the predatory cash bail system for nonviolent offenses, to make sure that law enforcement and public officials who choose to harm the community are held accountable, and to make sure we really implement radical transparency and be the change that we want to see in this country. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This concludes our Miami-Dade State Attorney Candidate Forum Part 1. As a reminder, primary election day is on Tuesday, August 18th. And if you are voting by mail, your ballot must be received, not postmarked, received by 8:00 p.m. on election day. We will come back on August 14th with the incumbent and Melba's opponent, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle. And thank you again to Melba Pearson and to everyone who joined us today.